bishop, they're interchangeable terms in the New Testament. Not different offices, nothing about sacraments, nothing about sacramental authority. The apostles of the New Testament had no concept of what has become the absolutely central and essential office of the sacramental Roman Catholic Church. Had no concept of it. This is why they cannot believe in sola scriptura, because if the scriptures are sufficient for the man of God, as they claim to be, then so many of her dogmas must be abandoned because they have no defensible basis in the New Testament whatsoever. You can't have the miracle of transubstantiation without an ordained sacramental priest. Eventual development of the Roman Catholic dogmatic teachings that are available today. Now, this is really interesting. This is really interesting. Again, this is still Hansen, the Christian Priesthood Examined. This is really, really interesting because this really resonates with me. It is appropriate at this point to pause and ask why the doctrine of a Christian priesthood, which is absent from the beginnings of the Christian ministry, should have emerged in the 3rd century. Perhaps it is significant. Listen to this. This is really interesting. I had forgotten that I had read this years and years ago. Probably because I read this long before I preached through all of Hebrews. Perhaps it is significant that the epistle to the Hebrews, after Tertullian, who refers to it only once or twice and tends to think that it was written by Barnabas, is totally unused in the Western Church until the middle of the 4th century. It does not seem to have been very influential in the Eastern Church during the 3rd century. Clement of Alexandria and Origen, in their references to it, make it clear that its Pauline authorship was not securely established. This must have tended to reduce its influence. Now think about that one for a moment. Think about what that means. What's the assumption going on here? The assumption, and it's a proper assumption, is if you read Hebrews, if you believe Hebrews, you're never going to believe Rome's teaching about her priests. Because the teaching of Hebrews is thoroughly, 100%, unalterably opposed to any concept of a sacramental priesthood in the church, some concept of a representation of the one sacrifice of the cross. Hebrews 7 through 10 is death to all of this. So isn't it fascinating that in asking, well, how did this arise? One of the answers given by this historian is, well, the period of time when it arises was a period where it doesn't seem like the book of Hebrews was exercising much in the way of influence. And I would add to this something that I've commented a number of times. You cannot even begin to understand what Hebrews is saying if you do not have a vital understanding of the Tanakh, a familiarity that goes beyond having gone to Sunday school and seen some flannel board presentations about the tabernacle. It needs to be the familiarity of a person who is intimately and regularly reading the text of the Tanakh, and especially of the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. And so, once you have the fatal and final schism between synagogue and church, necessary, but the way that it ended up happening, inordinate, to where you have the development of anti-Semitism, and you then combine that with the rise of allegorical interpretation as the primary mechanism for dealing with the text of the Tanakh, and falling into ignorance in regards to Jewish tradition and Hebrew language, and hence the backgrounds of Hebrews and so on and so forth. You put all that together, and that leaves the room for the development of something that, in light of Hebrews' teaching, would never ever develop otherwise. Would not be allowed to develop otherwise. Because if you believe Hebrews is apostolic, then you cannot believe that the Roman priesthood is. Not a possibility. It's day and night, X, not X, law of non-contradiction, whole 9 yards. It is fully contradictory to the biblical teaching at this point. Now, let me contrast that. Just I'm only giving you some quotes here, so you've got some ideas of, I've just found there's a lot of people in this audience I know at church when I start talking about this stuff, they want to hear more and more on this. And then I'll get to Rule's article. The apostles were clothed with the powers of Jesus Christ. The priest, as the successor of the apostles, is clothed with their power. This fact reveals to us the eminent dignity of the priestly character. The exalted dignity of the priest is derived not from the personal merits for which he may be conspicuous, but from the sublime functions which he is charged to perform. To the carnal eye, the priest looks like other men, but to the eye of faith, he is exalted above the angels because he exercises powers not given even to angels. That's James Cardinal Gibbons, The Faith of Our Fathers, page 317. That's the voice of the 19th century. Certainly not the voice of the 21st any longer. Not only are the priests, continuing with him a couple pages later, not only are our priests the ambassadors of God, but they are also the dispensers of his graces and the almoners of his mercy. Let a man so regard us, says the apostle, as ministers of Christ and dispensers of the mysteries of God, applying to the priests. To sum up, in a few brief sentences, the titles of a Catholic priest. He is a king, reigning not over unwilling subjects, but over the hearts and affections of his people. His spiritual children pay him not only the tribute of their money, but also the tribute of their love, which royalty can neither purchase nor exact. He is a shepherd because he leads his flock in delicious pastures of the sacraments and shelters them from the wolves that lie in wait for their souls. He is a father because he breaks the bread of life to his spiritual children whom he has begotten in Christ Jesus through the gospel. He is a judge whose office it is to pass sentence of pardon on self-accusing criminals. He is a physician because he heals their souls from the loathsome distempers of sin. Page 320. Well, I jump into the late 20th century to Patrick Dunn, Priesthood, a Reexamination of Roman Catholic Theology of the Presbyterate. Bearing in mind the crisis which the priesthood is now facing, the point is often made that there are no New Testament references to any ministerial priesthood. Hans Kung, along with a number of other contemporary writers, would argue from this that words such as priest or cleric should be dispensed with because the New Testament insists all believers are priests. Raymond Brown, however, makes a point that the earliest Christians, now this is really weird. Now, Raymond Brown gets quoted a lot. Not by me, but Raymond Brown gets quoted a lot. Now, Raymond Brown is a liberal Roman Catholic. All right? Now, Alan Rule says, you shouldn't quote him. When Rome starts cleaning up its own house, you can start talking about that. When this guy's writings are used as textbooks in Roman Catholic churches, in Roman Catholic